Magnus Carlsen lost his last classical game of chess on the 31st of July 2018 in the Biel Grandmaster tournament. He was playing against Shahriar Mamedyarov. I remember the game well. I was commentating live at the event, and Mamedyarov played brilliantly. But since then, no one has defeated Magnus Carlsen in a classical game of chess. The world champion has gone 125 games without defeat, and on the way secured some superb tournament victories. And indeed, in the Norway Chess tournament, he was leading going into round 5. He played against Jan Krzysztof Duda from Poland, 22-year-old Grandmaster, number 17 in the world, and, well, a real prodigy, a real rising star. So, let's see what happened. Duda with the white pieces, e4. Now, in the previous round, we saw Carlsen defeat Caruana in beautiful technical style in an endgame. How would Carlsen face this one today? Well, the Caro-Kann, very often quite a positional opening. Let's see. And here we have knight c3 from Duda. Carlsen exchanged. Now bishop f5 is the main line. Carlsen played this side line, knight f6, and after knight takes, e takes f6. In fact, this line is enjoying quite a run of fashion at the moment. It's quite modish. This was always the way that was recommended for white to play. So the bishop comes to d3, and then queen c2, immediately putting pressure on the pawn h7. So rook e8 check, knight e2. So black has something of a dilemma here. How do you defend that pawn on h7? Do you move it up to h6? But actually that gives white very good control over these squares and over the diagonal in general. And h6 can be vulnerable. Do you play g6, but then white has the standard h-pawn attack? Some players experimented with king h8, allowing the pawn to be taken, then you play g6. But of course, at some moment, black is going to have to make a decision and move the h-pawn and move the g-pawn. So that wasn't really satisfactory. But over the past few years, the move h5 has come into fashion. It's an extraordinary move, first played in 2014 according to my database, but really over the past 3 years it's come to prominence, and there have been hundreds of games with this move. Well, unsurprisingly, this is a computer recommendation. The point is that if the knight comes to g3, whoops, that's the wrong square highlighted, here, then that knight can be hassled. And if white castles kingside, I mean obviously that's got to happen if the knight wants to move, then in fact it's black that can often get some kind of attack down here. But in any case, it's really directed against that knight on g3. But still, it's an extraordinary move, advancing that pawn in front of the king. But it's been proved that black actually can get good play. Now, Duda plays a really critical line, which is to castle queenside. Obviously, with kings on opposite wings, then there's more of a chance of breaking open lines against the enemy king. And here, in the vast majority of games, black has played the knight back to f8. The knight is often a good defender of the king. In fact, well, there are 149 games in the ChessBase online database with knight f8. But Carlsen played b5, and that is a rare move. Although there have been a couple of recent games with this. So, I mean, the idea, I suppose, is pretty standard. It's to take control over the b5 square, which gives black greater control over d5. So, for example, I mean, that's actually been a game played by Jon van Foreest with this move, which went king b1, knight b6, bishop e6. So you can see that black's idea is to take control over these squares, and actually black has, I think, a very nice position here. It's not easy for white to attack on the king side. So what did Duda play here? Well, he played the move which aims to disrupt black's position. I think it's the principal move. He thought for almost 20 minutes here and played d5. So this is really disruptive, a really disruptive move. If that pawn is taken, then a check, and then rook takes d5, and tactically this is looking really dubious for black, with both those pieces attacked and rook d1 coming. Looks good. So Carlsen's move is practically forced here. He has to keep that d file closed. So he played c5. Now I'm sure this was preparation, and it's a very, very interesting idea for black. So black has given away a pawn, and well, white now has this 4 against 2 pawn majority on the queen side, but the b file is now open and black can hope to gain play down here. So c4 protects the bishop, a6 drives the bishop back to a4, and the b file is opening. Not quite open because there's a pawn on b2, but looks interesting. Now, there has been a previous game played from this position which went rook e5. But Carlsen played, I think, a much better move, rook e7. It looks a bit awkward, but in fact, once that knight moves, then black is simply aiming to double on the b file. So very logical. And Duda was consuming a lot of time at this point. So whereas, Carlsen, clearly this was some kind of preparation, although he was also taking a bit of time as well. Knight g3, that knight has to find a good square and looks at these points. Knight e5. Now, knight takes, well, that would allow bishop g4, or in fact, black could just continue with the attack with doubling on the b file. It's too much of a distraction. Knight e4 played. In fact, maybe bishop d2 is a cannier move to cover the a5 and b4 squares. In any case, Duda played knight e4, which also doesn't look bad, looking at that key bishop on d6, which, well, if it gets into the game on e5, could prove to be a very strong attacking piece. Rook b7, there we are. The rooks are doubled on the b file, looks very attractive. b3, and now a key move from Carlsen. This structure looks very secure. The bishop is protected. Rook b4, excellent move. That's why bishop d2 might have been an improvement to cover the b4 square. But here, after bishop d2 that was played, rook takes bishop. This is a very nice exchange sacrifice. You can see that rook whistles down the b file, and oh, the king on c1 is feeling the draft. My goodness, that is potentially very nasty for the king. So, well, isn't it interesting to see Carlsen play in this attacking style, freely giving up material just to, really go for his opponent's king. Bishop f5 played. So that looks pretty nasty, it has to be said. Slicing across the king. Rook e1. And now, well, Carlsen thought for almost half an hour. He had quite a big time advantage, but things started to even up after his next move, but it's maybe not the best. He played h4. That's quite a mysterious move. Perhaps he wanted to well, push one more to h3 to get through to perhaps use the f3 square for the knight. Knight g4 looks like a better move. So threats here, and if rook here, then bishop e5 brings that bishop to a very menacing square. Instead, Carlsen played h4. So h3, that takes away the g4 square from the knight. Knight g6, so this is Carlsen's idea. He wants to spin that knight round potentially to the f4 square, and he's also making room for the bishop to come to e5. So this also doesn't look too bad. Rook e3, but this is a good defensive move. So that rook covers important squares, can potentially come over to b3 to match that rook on b8, to nullify that rook on b8. Knight f4, there we go, the knight spinning in and looking at the g2 square among others. Now, white has many moves here. f3 is possible to secure the knight. Rook b3 is possible, but Duda went for g4. I mean, I think that's quite a risky move because, I mean, the bishop just nudges back anyway, and then potentially the h3 pawn is a bit vulnerable. It's so difficult for white to free his position here. King d1 played. So the king just edging out of the way. I mean, that does cover the e2 square in case that rook wants to move away, so the knight e2 check won't be possible. Now here, Carlsen should probably just wait for a moment and play queen d7. Looks at a4 and potentially lends the f5 break greater power. Instead he went f5 straight away. I mean, this is still very unclear, but let's have a look. Knight takes bishop. That dangerous bishop disappears from the board. G takes f5 and bishop h5 checks. So that still hassles the king. It's not easy. So f3, the king doesn't want to move again. And queen f6. So this is what Carlsen was aiming for. After that little transaction, he's managed to basically activate all his pieces. The queen looks down the long diagonal, the bishop pretty menacing on h5, and the rook, of course, still on that open file. So both players running a bit short of time, and although if you feed this position into a computer, it likes white's position very much, in practical terms, well, this is just so complex, all bets are off here. I mean, I was watching this live, and frankly, I just thought, well, this is going to be another classic Carlsen win. Pieces look so active. His opponent under pressure. I mean, how would you play with white here? It's really not easy. And Duda did not play the best move. The computer likes queen e4, which looks kind of reckless, allowing queen a1. I mean, it is so complex. Instead, Duda, I think, understandably played bishop c3 to prevent that black queen from operating on the long diagonal. Queen g5, and now Duda makes another inaccuracy. He should have played rook e1, but even then, you know, the path to secure an advantage is very narrow. It has to be said. White has to play so precisely. But queen e4 played, and now things are not so clear. I mean, black has two decent moves here. One simply f6, and king h7 is also not bad. But Carlsen makes a blunder. Queen g2, it looks very strong. Looks so tempting, hitting the rook, hitting the pawn on a2, but it's a mistake. After rook e1, queen takes a2 is a mistake. White to play. What would you do? There's a good move for white here. Queen takes. Queen c2 is the move. Duda said afterwards he almost played queen takes f4, allowing rook b1 mate. Shocker. But after a few seconds, he found queen c2. This is really powerful. Now, obviously, the endgame is winning for white. White is the exchange up. So Carlsen has to avoid that. Queen takes c4, and now rook e8 is a killer move. Here, Carlsen simply gave up the rook. Let's just see what would happen if, instead of king h7, which was played, rook takes rook. There's a very neat win for white here. Rook h8 check. Forcing king takes rook. Bishop takes pawn check. And queen takes queen. Nice discovered attack. So after rook e8 check, Carlsen played king h7. And that rook was gone. That was the only way to avoid that tactic. Of course, if rook h8 check in the previous position, then black's rook would have taken. But in any case, Duda has now won a rook. So now he's, well, loads of material up. But it's still pretty random. You know, with opposite colour bishops and that knight dancing around, still not so simple, particularly when you're short of time. Knight e2 check. And now Duda, well, he played it very simply. He played king b2. He could have taken here and played queen d8. And there are too many targets. You can see I've highlighted the g7 pawn, the king, and the pawn on h4, and that bishop on c3. And basically, black's king is not going to escape once that queen comes down here, or h8. And basically, white's king is completely secure with the bishop on c3. The king just hides out on b2. It's game over. So that would have been a quick way to win, but instead, king b2. But in fact, I mean, this is a very practical way for Duda to play, because in this case, the king is also very secure. But there's still a bit of work to do. Be careful, that rook is attacked. Queen d3 check, and rook f8. So, I mean, basically, white has consolidated now. The king is safe enough. Queen b4 check, king c1, no more checks. Queen b3, queen d4, queen c3, super solid. And now the king can hide up here without any difficulty. Queen d6, rook f7, so now white can turn his attention to the king. Queen g6, rook d7, queen g1 check, king b2, the king is completely safe here. c4, rook takes bishop. Now that brings white a step closer to victory. Once that beautiful bishop is eliminated from the board, then with the extra rook, it's going to be pretty plain sailing, because the queen can't do very much on its own. You can see actually white's king is very secure, and in a moment it's going to step right up the board. Here it goes. Crucially, everything is protected here, so that queen really can't do anything. And, well, there's certainly no perpetual check here. a5, and now that the king is open, I mean, it's the only chance for black to push those pawns, but the game ended very shortly. Here we go. Rook e4 check, final move, and here Carlsen resigned. Incredible. His first defeat after 125 classical games. Extraordinary. Well, congratulations to Jan Krzysztof Duda. What a performance. I mean, he said afterwards the game was totally random. It was very uncomfortable. Black has easy play against my king. but somehow he held his nerve, and it was the world champion that made that fatal error in playing Queen G2 and missing the tactic. Wow, incredible stuff. Well, I think Carlsen's record in classical chess will stand for a very long time. It really is remarkable. But the record has finally, well, it's been set, and his winning, or his the streak without defeat has finally come to an end. And Levon Aronian has taken the lead in the tournament. He defeated Fabiano Caruana, so the world's number 1 and number 2 were defeated on the same day. There you go. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting us via Patreon or PayPal. Thank you.